Technology fails us when we need it the most, doesn't it? Is it on? All right. Great. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be among you all. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Let me start off by a disclaimer. Being a lawyer, everything I say today is my personal journey, my personal views. It's not representative of any organization or other person. With that disclaimer out of the way, I really hope that I can bring some of my world into your world, expose you to some of my personal struggles and frustrations, but also hopes and dreams and achievements. It is a personal journey in a very convoluted world full of struggles and questions, and sometimes we don't have the answers, which is okay. I don't think we all have figured out things yet. The story started off by me being a very young, protective, spoiled girl in a country where family ties are stronger than ever. My mom and father both come from a province called Qassim, which is north of Riyadh, the capital, known for two things: dates, producing the best dates in the world, but also being a very conservative place. My father was born to a family of farmers. He literally was born in a farm with his cord being cut off by his mom in the field. My mother comes from somewhat of a different background. Her father was a merchant. They used to travel quite a lot. She got exposed to a variety of different experiences in her life. Brought up in Saudi Arabia, traveled the world a bit until the year 2000, when my father came into our living room announcing that we are going on a lifetime journey to the US. On a plane we go, arriving at the Big Apple, doing the tour, down at Disneyland, doing the 5 parks, and you know, that is an achievement of itself for a kid at that time. Off to California, and then of course we had to do Las Vegas. Vegas, first night, sitting around a dinner table, 5 of us. I'm the eldest of 5, my mother and father. Enjoying dinner, cracking up jokes, and really planning our next leg of the trip, which would be Alaska. My father started aching, and we thought he was just exhausted from all the travels that we were doing. So off he went to his room to get some rest. We had followed a few minutes later to find him down on his knees by the bed, screaming his lungs out. A scene that I have never seen before. In my mind, he's this powerful, mighty man. To find him on his knees was kind of strange. My mom calls up the general practitioner at the hotel. He comes up to the room. He looks at him and he says, "I'm afraid this is serious. You'll have to call 911. 911 come in, they look at him, and you know, off he goes in an ambulance to Sunrise Hospital in Vegas. In a van, my mom shoves the 5 of us and drives along, and we go to the emergency room and wait for 5 hours, the longest 5 hours of my lifetime. The doctors come back and call up for my mom and say, "Mrs. Alazzaz, how old is your husband?" 40 years old of age at that point in time. Any medical conditions, any history? Not at all. A smoker? No. An addict? Not at all. Any medical history in the family? Absolutely not. Parents are alive and kicking and very active. Well, I'm sorry to say your husband has been diagnosed with a 4th stage brain tumor. And we need to operate on him right away. They take him to the operation room while we wait, and we're still reflecting on that news, kind of news that you get when, a bomb is thrown in the backyard where children are playing, or a plane crashes while you're sipping coffee. It's that kind of news that you never contemplated or saw coming. It's the kind of news that you can't deal with and you haven't been prepped for. Off he went to the operation room while we wait for results. He comes out. Going in as a young, healthy, handsome man, coming out with his head half shaved and a scar that goes right through, losing his ability to walk and talk and having to learn it all over again like a child. His memory has been taken away. He couldn't recognize all of us right away, and we had to work out on certain things to help him come back to life. As he puts it, he was knocking on heaven's door and given a chance to come back to life and revisit some of the things that he was doing. It's funny how things end up, but he describes it as the best period of time because it was a lull period where he had most time to spend with the family as opposed to being so busy and working and traveling and doing all the kind of things that we all are busy doing. It's very ironic because it is at a time when we were away in Saudi Arabia. He was in Vegas, and then he moved to Houston and got treated at MD Anderson, one of the best hospitals out there. It is at a time when I, as a 14-year-old, was going through, teenage years of my life, struggling with, love and relationships, school and homework, and parents not being there. 18 months into it, and he eventually lost that battle to cancer. Unfortunately, what that meant for someone like me is all that protective environment has gone away, and I'm now naked in front of the world. That level of protection is gone, not only from an emotional point of view, but also from a legal system that requires a man to be part of your life. We live in a nation where a man is a source of consent for pretty much everything you do. Women are treated as perpetual minors in many ways. So he is the source of consent for travel, for marriage, for education, for a job, and all of that. To be exposed to that source being taken away and be faced with a question of what's next? Do you pause and is life now on edge? Do you escape and go somewhere else? That's a question that I get faced with all the time. Instead, what I chose to do is, there's little choice there, but fight that fight and pick up that battle. It's that desire in life and dignity and hope and dreams that kept me going. I was called into court as a 16-year-old, shuffling between classrooms and homework and exams and attending court sessions. Something that I struggled with. I didn't have the toolkit that one would need. But it was common sense. It was a matter of going and reciting parts of the Holy Book that really, in my mind, backed up my case. I was an orphan, and you don't mess up with orphans. You just don't. Unfortunately, again, the fact that I was a female in that courtroom did not help. And it did push me out of the door. I got questioned a lot of the times where, things like, where is your guardian? Where is your male companion? And it begged the question in my mind, I wouldn't be where I am arguing this case if I had someone besides me. My brother at that time was 6 years old, so he wasn't of age to be able to help out. The question then becomes a struggle of power. Who is next in line? Is it your grandfather? Is it your uncle? Is it your husband? I wasn't married. I was never married. And so all of these questions that I've never faced have all came to my mind, and I had to resolve them. Unfortunately, it's a struggle, but never a surrender. We never really got to the bottom of things. Luckily, my dad had left a will on a piece of paper with the letterhead of the hospital, and that was my secret ingredient that helped me pave the way. I argued the case and was able to enforce that and protect it for the longest time. It gave me a solution, an interim solution to maneuver life as much as I could. The important part, though, was my mom, who was behind us fighting a different battle, which is a battle for education, a battle for us to have a sense of belonging, a battle for us to have a meaning for life, regardless of that irrational debate that goes on in a court or in a society. And she certainly was the force behind me going abroad and pursuing a law degree at a time when law faculties did not open their doors for females. So off to England I went and faced with another challenge. I thought my English was all right until I went to a town northeast of England, and their English was pretty different, and I couldn't figure things out. I also was faced with the reality of being a student in a school in Saudi Arabia where we really pretty much stuck to the textbook. You know, free thinking was not something that is encouraged. Critical analysis was something that I didn't really understand. It's a matter of just memorizing what the textbook says and reciting it to someone. So we were reporters more than students most of the time. I was faced with the reality of walking into a lecture room with hundreds of other students, brilliant students from around the world, coming in with very little tools other than my poor English, and being faced with the reality of having to dig through cases and reports and articles. And my mind wasn't really functional at that point in time. I wasn't really set up to be thinking that way. So while people were able to, go 3,000 miles an hour, I was stuck with my digital dictionary figuring, some terminology and trying to recap on what the professor just said. It was a struggle, again. And it was a slap in the face when I worked so hard and got my first big fat F when I submitted my first essay. Called up my mom at that point in time and I thought, you know what, this is it. I tried and the beauty was in the attempt. I think I should pack up my things and come back home. She did say, you know what, just go along with the flow and let's see what happens. It was more of a concentration camp to me than a university. I used to go into the shower every 10 minutes to keep myself awake because I couldn't afford sleeping in or spending time watching a film or a movie or reading a book. Every minute counted. 4 years later, thankfully, I graduated with that law degree that I was pursuing very eagerly and desperately and knew that was the only thing that will back me up in this world. I came back to Saudi to be yet faced with another struggle. Well, yeah, what do you do with this law degree in a system that doesn't recognize you as a lawyer because of your gender? And at a time when the Ministry of Justice did not allow women to practice law, I thought, well, I'm crippled yet again. New York presented itself very well. They told me that there was something called the bar exam. In my mind, the bar is where you go and have some drinks, which I couldn't do. So off I went on a plane again and went to New York and crammed for months and months. In my mind, the odds are I pretty much failed that exam, which again does not, help. I remember the day we got the results was the same day when the royal marriage of Kate and William was going on. And I decided to sleep in that day, and my mom comes knocking on the door saying, "You better wake up." And I said, "Well, I really don't care about the royal wedding." She goes, no, this is not about the royal wedding. And she walks into my room, throws a newspaper on my bed, and I looked it up, and it had a headline that said, "Shihana Alazzaz breaking through and taking the Saudi woman into a new world." Like, really? What does that mean? It didn't mean that they found out that I passed the bar exam before I did. So That was, again, a relief. There we go. Another tool in your little kit that will help you maneuver. Well, what is next? You've got the law degree, you've got some admission and recognition elsewhere. The question then, in my mind, is do you pack up and leave yet again and explore an opportunity elsewhere, or do you go back home? Home was the answer. That sense of belonging was the answer. Despite the struggle, despite the frustration, despite those roadblocks on the way, we tend to go back home. Migration, in my mind, was meant for birds, not human beings. And so off I went to Saudi Arabia yet again, and faced with the reality of job opportunities not presenting themselves very well. And I've kind of set myself up for failure. I pursued a degree that wasn't really allowed for females, pursued a profession that was prohibited for females. So if anyone was to blame, it was me. Luckily enough, one of the law firms that was in Saudi Arabia at the time offered me a job. I practiced behind closed doors for 4 years until we pushed boundaries gently, elegantly, never with anger or violence. And that petition went off to our king, and slowly change came about. And women were allowed to practice law after such a long time. Another accomplishment, one at a time, but never really yet there. There was always that glass ceiling, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So what is the path, and how do we pave the path for oneself? The most important, I think, aspect of it is not to be alone in that journey. So I quickly turned around and thought to myself, what if I help other women get into that field? There will be too much of us that can't handle too much of it. Turned around and created those internships for girls who were graduating from local universities at that time. And it proved to be a very successful program. I was accused of being biased, and that's okay. I think it's called affirmative action in the US. But frankly speaking, and I did test this, if I were to censor the names off those resumes that I received and let anyone pick the candidate that they thought would be best, it was the female. And maybe the reason was they went through a different journey, a journey that was full of struggle and frustration and shaped them into what they are. So we quickly built up a team, both men and women, and worked together. I reached a comfort zone at that point in time with Baker McKenzie and thought I've set myself up for partnership. But that comfort zone was scary because I felt like I'm not going forward anymore. Vincent & Elkins was presenting a unique opportunity. They'd never opened an office in Saudi Arabia before, and they presented that opportunity of being part of the first layer, part of that brick in the foundation. Come and mark your, self as the leader and pioneer in our office. There were other law firms that presented equally good opportunities, but they were the same law firms that shut the doors 5 and 4 years before that when I was a nobody. And now when I'm making headlines, you want to capitalize on that? Hell no, I would not. So I turned down those offers and in a very counterintuitive way went off and pursued a new opportunity with a law firm that didn't really exist at that time and we helped put together and build. 5 years into it, we were a full-fledged law firm in Saudi Arabia, focused on oil and gas and energy because that was the niche practice that Beanie brought into the market, but did a range of things from M&A and capital markets and litigation and arbitration and whatnot. Again, a comfort zone after 5 years and building teams and putting people together. And then the government called me up. Oh boy, what to do now? I mean, I was this sort of free thinker floating around in private practice, doing my own thing. To switch to government was very different and difficult. But we are going through interesting times in Saudi Arabia, and change has never come about the way it is now. We've got a new young leadership, our crown prince, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who is a visionary guy. And he is a person that a lot of our generation, my generation, can relate to. For the longest time, we had older, wise men ruling our country. For the very first time, we had someone of our generation. Mind you, this is a country that is very young. The majority of the people are under the age of 30. So the opportunities, but the challenges that we present as a young nation had someone to understand them, and His Royal Highness was one. He did announce about a year and a half ago a very ambitious program called the National Transformation Program. And the essence of that program is the following. Obviously, with the turmoil going around, all our borders are surrounded by wars and uprisings and failed states and all of that. Oil prices dropping to, prices that they have dropped to. Being an economy that is so dependent on oil, all of these struggles presented themselves at the same time. So he announced this ambitious program to reform our economy. It was both an economic and social program. Some of the main pillars is to bring women into the workforce. There have been attempts before that. One of the key things that happened a few years back was feminizing retail. And I say feminizing, it literally meant that. We had a situation where all retail stores, whether cosmetics, lingerie, clothes, whatever, were served by men only. So I'd walk in, as ironic as it sounds, I'd walk into a store, probably covered in my black robe and hijab, and start discussing, my makeup with a man, or, the size of my underwear with a man. So it was very controversial and stupid. So that change came about, and it created job opportunities for thousands and thousands of girls. Another change came about very recently, which is the introduction of sports for females. For the longest time, sports and physical education was not taught to girls in schools. There was no opportunity to exercise in a gym for a female. We exercise in person and in private because female gyms did not exist. There were, I think for the first time, 4 female participants in the last Olympic Games from Saudi Arabia. So again, a whole new field for females to embark on and explore. The legal field, as I just explained, was open a floodgate of lawyers coming in and working their way out. It was interesting times. So I had 2 options. When that opportunity with the government presented itself, I could either walk the path I've already started and continue to be in private practice, or be part of that system that 12 years before that, frustrated me so much and caused me so many issues. Why not be that lady in government that introduces change? It's not to say that it doesn't come without challenges. But wherever you go, there will be that one annoying person. But once you meet them, just greet them and be happy that you found them and just embrace it. It is a struggle, it is a change, but I think the one key message I want you all to take away from today is to look beyond our stereotypical preconceived notions of what a Saudi woman is like and what a woman in Salt Lake City is like. We all share struggles. I hear the equal pay issue in the U.S. comes along in every debate or discussion I have. Pretty much doesn't exist in Saudi Arabia, kid you not. The equal opportunity issue does come up and is there, but the equal pay issue is not there, interestingly. So I think the basic idea is to really look beyond what people look like or how they dress up or what the media tells you. I think we are living in very interesting times where virtual reality has overtaken our actual reality. And what we hear in the media is really feeding into our fears and how we think our nations should be run. And that is a very dangerous proposition and a very dangerous world to be in. It is a very small world. What happens in the Middle East will affect people in the US. What happens in Latin America will affect people in Asia and whatnot. We've never lived in such a small world and connected world as we live in today. And I do think that it comes down to people. It's those relationships that we build between each other. It's those bridges that we build among each other. It's that Jewish friend that I've met 4 years ago that I traveled with in so many different places. It's that, Christian friend that comes and hosts me every time I come to New York. It's looking beyond our faith and religion. It's coming together because of our dreams and aspirations. And I truly, truly believe that it starts with two people coming together and bonding and creating those friendships that will live beyond our fears and beyond what our governments think and beyond what our voters think. So please, with today's evening, please, please, please do think broadly and look beyond those preconceived notions. With that, I really urge you to ask as many questions as you want and keep those difficult questions coming up. There is no question that can't be asked. Thank you very much.
So we have several mics that we can spread throughout the room. In fact, if we could have those helpers come up and grab them up here. And I ask you to use the mic not so she can hear you, but everyone can hear your question. It's your education. What really drew you back there?
I ask myself that question every day. Every day. But it is funny because once I'm abroad, and after living so long abroad, you kind of do miss home. And you miss the very simple things. I come from the desert, and I love the desert. It gives me that sense of, no boundaries, no limits. The horizon is the limit. And I miss it, and I love it, and I love being there. I miss the people. I miss the food. I miss being with my parents and mother and, siblings. But it is that sense of belonging. There's no place like home, and people naturally get attached to their land and their home. Regardless of where I go, I will remain to be that Arab Muslim girl, and I will always be categorized as that Arab Muslim girl. At home, I'm just home. And those frustrations are frustrations that we all share in our community. I'm not alone. But it's also about not giving up on your own country and nation. If I were again to leave, and everyone of the like mind to leave, what is left? What is left in Saudi Arabia? It's such a beautiful country. And for us to kind of just give up and throw our hands up in the air and say, you know what, New York is a better place. I mean, it is a great city, and I love it, but it's not home.
Who has a question? Oh, go right there in the back, would you? Don't be shy. We have about 30 minutes, I think, to ask questions and get some answers from our guests.
I just wanted to know what it was like, or what this transition to, I guess, females being accepted in the workplace, what it's like in Saudi Arabia right now. Is there pushback from the men, or is it pretty much accepted in general?
I mean, let me ask all the American women here, what is it like being in the workplace? I'm sure we share the same struggles. I'm sure we do. But I'll tell you, there's an incident where I was going to work and went into the elevator. I was the only woman and surrounded by men. And intentionally, two men started talking to each other saying, oh, those females, not only are they, taking away the jobs, they're even suffocating us in elevators, That is some, sort of, I would like to think, insecure men that think that way. Let me tell you a bit of how the workplace looks like. I walk in, I'd be wearing my black robe, which, funny enough, one of my friends who is a judge in federal courts here said, it doesn't look any different than walking into a courtroom when you do this. But I do wear my black robe. I have a loosely headscarf on. I never cover my face. I was never convinced of that. I work with men all the time. My desk is right next to a man, and we share ideas and debates. I also would like to point out that I was trained by men. Obviously, being, sort of at the front line of that field, there were no other women to look up to. And so I owe it to a man who trained me and provided the support and was my sponsor. And that is, I think, the key point, is to have a sponsor wherever you go that will look after you and push for things to happen your way. But haters will hate, right? Those insecure men will continue to exist.
Very secure man right here.
In this transformation that you're talking of, which is going on in your country, do you foresee in the near future women coming up to drive?
Oh, that's
I have
right.
another question to follow.
That's right. I mean, you among all shouldn't be asking me that question. You know Saudi better, but I always say, this driving issue will only be resolved when self-driving cars we'll stop worrying about who is behind the wheel. But frankly speaking, I don't know why it's taking so long. I'm puzzled myself. I think people in the government are also equally puzzled. I will tell you what a good friend of mine, Princess Rima bint Bandar, who is a role model, and I'll tell you a bit about her in a minute, said. She said, well, listen, all we need is a plan. Let's work on a plan. If you're telling me, we need a driving school for girls, great. Let's put that down as, part of the plan. If you're telling me you need women to be part of the police and traffic force, great. Let's put that as part of the plan. If whatever it is that we need to get women to start driving, let's create that plan and start executing. But not to have answers for so long is pretty much not acceptable anymore.
My second question is, and you have an option not to reply to that. Did you win at Vegas or lose?
Did you next question.
Interestingly enough, you told me a little bit about your father's connection to covering women and the right to drive. That was an interesting part of his journey, is kind of a black sheep of his family being a photographer and a writer.
Sure. So the incident that I was talking about was in the 90s. This is during the Second Gulf War when Iraq invaded Kuwait. A lot of commotion was going on in the region. And a group of women went behind the wheels and started driving their cars in the main street. This is over 27 years ago or so. So it's a long time ago, and the issue remains to exist up until today. At that point in time, my father was a journalist, a photographer, a writer, and he wanted to cover that incident. So off he went with his cameras, and he filmed all these women and photographed them and wrote a report. And he thought that will be a breakthrough. That will take him, to the global scene, and that will just mark his name on the world's map. Truly it did, but not in the way he thought it would. Shortly after he prepared that report and put together everything ready for publication, he got a funny call, and in a car he went, and he was gone for a while in detention. So he paid the toll, and he was imprisoned after that. So he was pretty much an activist, someone who supported women's rights. He was not the only one that paid the price. He jokes about it. He says, well, the women drove and I ended up in prison. But they also did. They lost jobs. They, for a very long time, were not able to pursue careers in public service. Those who had private businesses were shut down. So it was a very high price to pay for wanting, to drive. But yeah.
Thank you for sharing your journey with us. We've been talking about driving, which seems like a non-intimidating in some ways type of, activity. What was it that persuaded them to allow women lawyers to start to practice? Because that seems like so much more of a significant step. And what were some of the steps that you took that you and your other fellow practitioners took that made them feel comfortable with making such a momentous change?
I agree. I mean, you would tend to think that, the legal field and allowing women to practice law and potentially even probably be in courts and be judges is so much more serious than being in a car. But I think it's the history. I think the way, the evolution of that restriction on women not being able to drive came about was obviously when a car was brought in for the first time. It happened to be that a man was there to operate it, and women were not really interested in doing so. And slowly it became a man's thing. There was never really a law that prohibited that until that incident that I've just shared with you happened, where the Ministry of Interior kind of just dictated that that would not be allowed. It's, I think, control more than anything. But that's why I say when we have self-driving cars, it will no longer be relevant. As a matter of fact, the ride-sharing industry has disrupted that prohibition already. We've got Uber and all kind of ride-sharing companies in Saudi that provided a great solution for women. It does come with cost, so obviously a man can own a car and drive themselves around, a woman cannot, and end up paying so much of her income for either a personal driver or public transportation or ride-sharing companies. So it has an economic cost to it, which is tremendous. I do think the change will come about. I am very hopeful that it will come about. And if it doesn't, it's that new reality, whether it's the self-driving car or ride-sharing companies, that will just make that current reality moot and obsolete. But we are all confused as to why that issue has taken so long. It could be, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it could be that we all still debate that. And we sit here in a room in Salt Lake City and talk about why Saudi women don't drive today. I really don't know. I really struggle every day to figure out why this has taken so long.
First of all, we are all so proud of you and all the progress you've made.
Equal rights, women, yes.
So my question is I want to know, what is the reaction from Saudi women? I'm wondering, I would hope that the majority are going, oh my gosh, thank goodness. She's setting some wonderful standards, or at least the younger generation. I'm wondering if any of the older generation are going, what are you doing? This is not our tradition. Do you get any negative feedback?
Sure. Very good question. I think there was a period of time when obviously you attract and solicit unwanted attention and commentary because you are breaking through taboos and walking a path that is not conventional. I think you win them over eventually. And when I say that, I reflect on my own modest journey. When I first went off abroad to study, everyone was against it. I mean, apart from my mother and siblings and maybe a couple of the extended family, everyone was like, really? Are you sending her off on her own? What's going to happen to her? Is she going to wander off with a guy? Like, all these kind of questions come up. Funny enough, as soon as you start, passing with colorful, marks, they come and say, oh, we want the same for our daughters. And it's just a matter of proving the case that this is a path of dignity and hope and dreams. And it is proving the case. And unfortunately, you have to go through a moment in time or a period in time where you will be attacked, you will be criticized. I still do. But do you get into a debate, an irrational, everlasting debate, or do you focus on the things that really matter? And do you bring about change that is positive and that really impacts people's lives? I would say focus on the latter. The other thing that I really believe in is that we all have, there are simple and very common notions that appeal to a human mind. If you talk to a woman that is sophisticated and exposed and well-traveled, or an illiterate, 90-year-old grandmother sitting in a remote village, we'll all agree on some basics of dignity and, love and laughter and hope and all of that. And so find those common grounds and bring them together. I think when women attack you, they don't know any better. I really think they don't know any better, and their mindset has been hijacked by someone. I really believe so. And it's breaking through those cracks and making sure they understand why you're doing certain things and where that will come and serve them. And you're there to help, and you're there to provide them with a better way of living. You're not there to take away anything that they want or have. So it's finding those common grounds that are appealing to hopefully everyone.
Thank you so much for being here and for sharing. I had a question. So you mentioned, especially when you first started out in school and in England at the end, you were failing and struggling, and you called your mom and you're like, that's it, I'm coming home. And she said no, and you stuck it through, and obviously were successful. What was it that really made you overcome those challenges and all the future challenges? And then what do you say, now I'm sure you have many mentees and other women coming to you as they're going through challenges where it's so hard to push forward and it's so easy to just walk away. What do you tell them?
A few things. I think I've learned it the hard way. The story I've shared and the struggle that we went through, seeing my father, lose his ability to control his body or memory, or it was something that, I didn't realize until I saw before my own eyes. To be able to know exactly what's wrong. I look him in the eye and I know that there's a brain tumor sitting right there in your left corner. But I can't do anything about it. And he can't do anything about it. And he slowly loses, self-control and body control, and he's so weak. Gives me that sense of, until you're in that position, you ought to do whatever it takes. Until, you are literally not in control and unable due to circumstances that are out of your control, you ought to push through. You have no other excuse. The other thing I think is that you have little options. If, you can't look back and turn back and say, oh, my father will take care of me, or my mother will hold me on, and that safety net is taken away, and all you're left with is yourself, and you either help yourself and pick up the pieces and move forward. You'll always be, in this desperate situation of failure. But the third and most important thing is faith. I won't say I am, you know, a very religious person, but I'm truly a very faithful person. I do think that there is something beyond this world that keeps us who we are, and I am very much attached to that idea of faith. And things will work out. And I go to bed every day thinking, you know, I've done all I can, I've put on all the effort, but something else will sort things out for me, and the stars will align. And I truly believe in that. And it worked for me tremendously. In moments of desperation, it worked the most.
Given your current role, I was hoping you could speak a little bit on Aramco's IPO, as kind of what that means for Saudi economic diversification down the road.
Well, I can speak about what is out there in the public. The idea really is to take our oil company and float it in public markets. And that revenue will create opportunities for our economy. And this is something that His Royal Highness, our Crown Prince, announced several times. It's a very ambitious plan. And it's a minority stake of no more than 5%, as far as has been announced today. And it could be any market, whether New York or London or Asia. No decision has been made there. And the idea, again, is to take that revenue and reinvest it in sectors of technology, healthcare, infrastructure, real estate, you name it, and create a diversified economy for Saudi Arabia, which has been for a very long time dependent on oil, something that is not sustainable, obviously, in this day and age. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm from Saudi Arabia. I don't speak English very well because that I need speak Arabic. I need Ragda tell what speak. Come please Ragda. تعالي معي. طبعا انا بتكلم بالعربي وابي من رغده تشرح لان صعبه انت تشرحين وتجاوبين في نفس الوقت ممكن يكونون الفت من عندها. طبعا انا اعرف قديش يعني الكثير من بناتنا مثلا تحلم بالشيء اللي وصلت له اللي هو شيهان. شيء مو سهل خاصه في السعوديه العربيه بحكم البيئه، ظروف الحياه. فانا اتمنى يعني منها تقدم نصيحة لكل بنت سعودية لها حلم عندها طموح تحقق هالشيء. طيب ايش ممكن تسوي؟ لأن فعلا في مصاعب أنا أدركها أنا ككوني سعودية. عطفا على ذلك كونها متحدثة جيدة على المسرح، كون أشياء كثيرة هذه طبعا ممكن أتكلم فيها بعدين يعني معي شخصيا. فأنا ودي
أنا أترجم ولا أنا أجاوب؟
تشرحين لهم سؤالي وبعد ذلك تجاوب بحكم ما يقدرون.
Okay, Abdulaziz here is asking. He wants to know. Since she's a Saudi female and I'm also a Saudi female, I work in Aramco. I'm part of King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture, which is sponsoring this program, and it's called Bridges Talks, and we're bridging Saudi Arabia and United States through culture. Just to explain who I am and why did he call me here. So his question is, just a second.
حلم كل بنت سعودية توقف على المسرح زي ما وقفت اختنا شيهان. ايش ممكن تقدم؟ ايش الظروف اللي راح تواجهها؟ كيف تقدر؟ طبعا السالفه العظيمه. اعطيه طريقك باسلوب.
He's saying that every girl in Saudi Arabia has a dream, or most of the girls in Saudi Arabia has a dream to stand and be in Shihana's place right now. So, the first part.
ممتاز. طبعا لو معنا اي عربي راح يفهم ايش انا قايل بالضبط.
سلام عليك والله.
سلام عليك. ايش
What
ممكن الصعوبات اللي بتواجهها؟
is the difficulty?
شرح الصعوبات عشان تكون موقنة ايش ممكن تقابل عشان ما توقف تكون عثرة
So
نهائية.
eventually the dream is to be in Shihana's place. So what is the challenges and what is the difficulties that she's facing or she would be facing in order for her to be in Shihana's
في الأخير أخيرا يعتذر لأنه ما له شهرين في أمريكا.
Okay, and finally he apologizes because he's been here for 2 months only and he's trying to learn English and to be able to she's the one who is helping him out to learn the English. He is very, very proud of Shihana, and I'll let Shihana right now answer.
Well, I could share very shortly because we don't want to take a lot of time. One of the feedbacks that came through, that we've been bombarded with messages of love and support and all of that, but one cute video that came through last night was a father sitting with his two young daughters, a 5-year-old and probably a 2-year-old. And he's self-videoing this and sending it through. And he goes, "Hey, what do you want to do when you grow up?" And she goes, "Shihana Alazzaz." And I'm like, what does that really even mean? Right? But there you go. That's good enough for me.
You and then you.
We probably can take 2 questions at a time if we're not
Yeah.
doing so well.
Go ahead and
Let's
say
do that.
Hello, first of all, thank you so much for being here. Well, we're proud of you. I think you acknowledged some of the cultural challenges with Saudi Arabia, some of the gender disparities in laws and treatment of women. How do you think? I know you talked about incremental, gradual change from within. How you were striving to do that, which is very healthy for many governments. Do you think there is a role for external countries who play a big role in Saudi Arabia, who hold a large stake in Saudi Arabia's existence? Do you think there's a role for them to influence or incentivize Saudi Arabia to evolve?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
I have actually 2 questions. One is, what do you find to be the most tedious question you seem to be asked, and how do you respond? And secondly, what is your vision for the next 5 to 10 years, both for yourself and for a Saudi?
Well, let me answer that. The first question, I think, the driving question that comes up in every single conversation, and hopefully in 5 years' time, people will stop asking me. But your question, I think there is absolutely a role to be played. And from what I've seen from my personal experience, when I look at international law firms, for example, that come and open up shop in Saudi Arabia, and for the longest time shut their doors and not allow women to come in, claiming that, well, it's the culture, it's the law, it's the rule. Well, why are you here then, right? In my mind, if I were to write a letter to your head office in New York or Chicago or Houston or whatever, I don't think it would be perceived very well. So I do think that double standard should slowly go away. And I do think that they do have a corporate social responsibility to bring about change. There are best practices that we can learn both ways. I think the key message that I try to share most with a lot of these organizations, whether companies or nonprofit organizations, is don't shy away when the word culture is thrown at you. When people tell you, but it's our culture and it's our religion. Well, peel the layers off. It's a very convoluted onion, and try to understand what that culture is about. And try to understand why that culture is the way it is, and whether that culture has been hijacked by a certain mindset, and whether that culture is unified across the nation, and whether that culture is for someone to claim to understand the most. So I do think that the conversation ought to continue, and they ought to really push the difficult questions and get answers to. And I really do not have a lot of respect for those who do not. I really do not.
Could you comment on the influence of Wahhabism in present-day Saudi Arabia, and if most of the population is under 30, is it on the wane?
That's a meaty one. I think it's just that one right there.
Okay. Well, you can go with so many theories about what Wahhabism influenced and what it's doing and all of that. I can tell you that we have suffered the most from terrorist attacks. So 9/11 definitely brought about change and a clash of civilizations between West and East. But if you're to come and reflect on Saudi Arabia and its recent history and whether it's the terrorist attacks that happened in the Eastern Province or in Riyadh or you name it, we had our own pain and suffering and casualties. And so our government has definitely tried to put a very forceful agenda and policy to counter terrorism. I think we were very successful in doing so. Our former Minister of Interior, who just stepped down, was a key figure. He was a strong ally of America, and he definitely countered terrorism with a very strong force. I'm not saying that it's all solved. Obviously, there are, still lines that are fed based on what is called Wahhabism as the main vein for that kind of activity. But it's definitely trying to, we as a nation, and our government is definitely trying very hard to counterattack that kind of radical thought that may overtake our lives before anyone else.
Let's do 3 in a row. So here, here, here. As a woman practicing law in Saudi Arabia, do you have all the privileges that males would have? Like, for example, can you argue for case in court? Okay, and your question?
I just want to say shukran. Thank you very much. My husband and I lived in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia from 94 to 97. And my 4th daughter was actually born there. And this is more of a comment than a question. Our time there, of course, accompanied by my husband, we traveled Jeddah and in that area extensively. And I'll have to say that the people were beautiful. The geography reminded me very much of Moab, southern Utah, and I can see your love of the desert, my love of the desert. But my husband was there, sponsored with his company, Procter & Gamble, and he was working on CoverGirl makeup. So his tagline was he was selling CoverGirl for covered girls. Again, people to people, one-on-one. We had a fabulous time in the Middle East, in Jeddah. And again, if people can be diplomats to the world, we would solve a lot of problems.
Absolutely.
So I also grew up in Saudi Arabia, and I appreciate you coming out here and painting this dynamic image of what it means to be a woman in the Middle East, because I think a lot of times that's something that's missed out in the West. So my question is, to what extent do you, moving forward now that women can practice as lawyers in Saudi, how do we get them on the bench or in the judiciary? Are there similar problems? Are they the same problems that it was just for practicing law, or are there other problems that are unique to specifically the judiciary that you see needing to be addressed, and how are people like you and similarly minded trying to address those issues?
Right, and that ties into the first question.
Absolutely. Let me tackle both at once. So when the change came about and the regulations that changed to allow women to practice law, before that announcement was made, we were all anxious because we thought that if they do allow women to practice, it will be full of restrictions, and we can only do certain things, and we probably would only argue family cases, and only with female clients, and only there was a lot of anxiety going on. Surprisingly, pleasantly surprisingly, there were none. We were equally treated, absolutely equally treated, in terms of qualifications and requirements and what we need. Now, that's the set of regulations. Is it the same in practice? I would say the process of being licensed, yes, and somewhat easier. They were definitely very keen on issuing licenses in a very practical and efficient way. So, if I were to go and file an application for a license and a male colleague would do the same, I probably would get it faster. I probably would definitely get it faster. There was a lot of dedication and focus on getting that done. However, the judiciary is still somewhat restricted because the pipeline is a males-only pipeline. The part of the requirements to become a judge in Saudi Arabia is to be a graduate of a certain judicial institute, which unfortunately up until today does not allow women. Courtrooms are still restricted, and you can appear before a man and argue your case before a judge. You still cannot be a judge as a woman. So it is a bit restricted in that sense.
I've been teaching a lot of Saudi students down at Utah Valley University for the last 5 years, and it's been an honor, and I've had great relationship with all of them, but for the most part they've been men. And it's only been this semester where that number of Saudis has diminished to very few, and my understanding is that it's from the drawback of the scholarships for the different Saudi students. I did have 2 women last semester, and they were wives of Saudi men students. So my question is Saudi still encouraging students to go abroad for their education, and then reflecting on the numbers that I've seen, it hasn't been lopsided towards men, and is that getting better for the women to go abroad for their higher education?
Sure. So just for those who are not aware of that program, our government started a very generous scholarship program for students, undergrad and postgrad. And it started off in 2005, 2006, so it's in its 10th or 11th year now, and it's a free ride to education, no strings attached. So imagine graduating debt-free, no student loans, and being ready to embark the world of jobs. What has happened is probably just a reduction in numbers, but it hasn't been sort of shut down. It could be that the University of Utah didn't receive as much students as one would want, but there are a couple 100,000 Saudi students in the US, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a huge number. Women and men are equally treated, except that maybe that is another restriction that causes few number of women to come about. Is there is a condition which, in my opinion, causes a bit of a problem, that female students need a man to be accompanying them. So it creates a bit of an issue. I mean, for me to be able to find a husband or a father or brother to leave his job and duties and accompany me for 4 years or 5 years or however long it takes is too much to ask for. And I would say there is a very funny short film by a Saudi filmmaker that talks about that. It's called, I think, Compass. It talks about this female student that goes abroad to study in Germany and is forced to take her brother with her to fulfill that condition and take the bus, and he just creates all kinds of troubles for her. So I would really encourage you to watch that film, just on a side note. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Hiba, and my question is, being that you said that, correct me if I'm wrong, that you were taught this field by a man and that you owed it to a man, how was the process, experience, and challenges like teaching and mentoring the women?
And we've been talking a lot about women versus men, but I want to understand if there's any type of workplace environment of international women compared to the native women who are working in Saudi Arabia, if there's any comparable differences that you see.
Okay, let me try to tackle both questions together. I think it falls on the likes of me to create opportunities for young girls, because I think while I was lucky, so to speak, to find a man that was supporting and providing the mentorship and training and guidance, there are probably not a lot of men that are willing to do the same out there. So it definitely falls on the likes of me to create that path for younger girls to come on board and learn and get the mentorship they want. Unfortunately, I can't do it all, so it really requires probably a bit of organizational sort of skills and an institution to provide a proper training. I think the international women have a role to play as well. So we do have a few non-Saudi women lawyers that are practicing in Saudi Arabia who would be much older than me and have experience from abroad that can bring it into Saudi and have a great role to play. I don't think they would be any different from, you know, the challenges that I would face or the opportunities that I would find. So I think both of us coming together, Saudi and non-Saudi females, building a path forward for the younger lawyers coming up is definitely something that we have been working on and we should continue to work on in a more forceful way.
So in closing, just two quick questions. Do you still have consent issues since you live in Saudi Arabia?
I always will have consent issues, for sure, but go ahead.
And the last one, the piece of advice your mother gave you before you came on this trip.
All right, well, the consent issue continues, but I must note that there has been, again, in those sort of, the suite of initiatives that have been taken by the government to pave the way and provide a better life for a Saudi female. A royal decree was issued a couple months ago saying something along the lines of just let her get on with her life, right? If the law doesn't really explicitly require consent, you're not supposed to ask for it. So there were practices that abuse that notion of guardianship, where, for example, a landlord would not lease a woman any real estate, whether an apartment, a house, a studio, you name it, without the consent of the man. Where did that come from? No one knows. There is no law that requires that. It's just practice, right? So that ought to stop. Certain hospitals had practices that required a man's consent to perform certain operations and procedures on a woman. Well, it's my body, for God's sake, right? And so that stopped.
What we think here too.
But again, you know, the notion was abused, and the king decreed that ought to stop. So that was a great improvement. In my humble opinion, it doesn't get us where we need to be. From a Sharia perspective, there are a lot of scholars out there that would argue the only consent that is absolutely required is in marriage and under a certain age. Otherwise, you should be really treated as an adult. So I think there's still work to be done in that field of consent or the lack thereof. And that is the worst scenario to be put in, where you either don't have a man that is supportive or that you have a man that is abusive. So you have a 16-year-old son who, although you're of age, 60 years old or whatever, will ask you for a paycheck every time you need his consent. So that has been there, and it's quite abusive in many ways. A piece of advice that my fighter, my mother, gave me was speak your mind, be yourself, and stand tall. And I do truly follow her advice every time.
Shihana, thank you so much for being our inaugural speaker for the World Affair Lecture Series. I am so delighted that you all decided to share your evening with us as we kicked off this series. Thank you so very much, Shihana, for all that you do.
Thank you a lot, and very genuine offer. Please do come and visit. You've got family. Please get in touch. My contact details can be shared. Any questions, any comments, it's all about that friendship, that one-on-one friendship. Thank you.
Speaking of comments, we do have the evaluation form that we would love to have you fill out. And also, I would definitely like to thank the Middle East Institute and also King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture. If you enjoyed your time tonight and you are a newbie to the Utah Council for Citizen Diplomacy, I would like for you to take Mary Dixon's lead on being a citizen diplomat and joining us for the next lectures that we have. We have a really exciting series lined up where we'll talk about disease diplomacy, the rule of law as it relates to combating extreme violent terrorism of sorts. We're talking about the Congo and what that repercussions are in the world. We're talking about a lot of different things, and if you don't know what that lineup is, we have some great brochures outside, and you can also visit us at utah.diplomacy.org. Thank you again, Shihana. Thank you for joining us.